Good morning. Thank you for joining us. We are just getting started. We're going to give it a couple more minutes for folks to join us and troubleshoot any tech issues that they might be having. So we will get started, I want to say around 9:33, so stay tight. Again, thank you for joining us. I see that folks are still trickling in, so we're going to give it just a few more moments before we get started. All right, thank you for joining us today for our webinar on combating summer melt amid a pandemic. We know that even in the best of circumstances, large number of foster youth who intended to go to college do not arrive for the first day of class. This phenomenon is known as summer melt. Today's webinar is for adult supporters of foster youth students and will focus on strategies to overcome summer melt and keep foster youth engaged, prepared, and excited for the first day of classes. I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself and our panelists for today. So I am Sarah Potter, and I am the Education Program Manager with John Burton Advocates for Youth. I am joined today by Asia Dunlap, who I will have introduce herself next.
Good morning. My name is Asia Dunlap, a youth advocate for John Burton Advocates for Youth, and also a student at Sacramento State University.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Karina Garcia, and I am the Academy Director for the First Star Bruin Guardian Scholars Academy, a college access program for foster youth.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Francisco Zamudio, and I am a program manager within the education department at United Friends of the Children, and I'm very happy to be with you all this morning.
Good morning. My name is Giselle Ramos. I'm a foster educational liaison in the Antelope Valley area at the high school levels. I'm placed at 2 high schools out there for National Center for Youth Law.
Excellent. And then also joining us today, we have Demi Rauscher from John Burton Advocates for Youth and Lindsay Collins from First Star. They will likely be chiming in during our question and answers portion, but I wanted to give them a quick thank you for helping us organize this and develop the content. So before we launch into the content, I want to share some quick logistical information with you. On your control panel, you will see a section for handouts. Here you can download the PowerPoint that we will be using today if you would like to print it out to take notes or just have it for future reference. During the webinar, you can use the questions panel to type your questions. We will do all of the questions and answers at the end of the presentation, but feel free to send your questions at any point during the webinar. If we are unable to get to all of the questions today, we will respond directly to you via email. If you have any technical problems during the webinar, you can use the same panel to communicate with us and we will help troubleshoot. Finally, the audio and the video of today's recording will be posted on the JBay website. You can see that listed on the screen if you would like to share the content with others or just listen again at a future time. So we have a lot of nuts and bolts to review in terms of deadlines and tasks for getting students prepared for that first day of college. But before we delve into those pieces, I wanted to take a moment to ground us in what it is like to start college as a former foster youth and how that is further complicated by the multitude of changes resulting from the pandemic. So research shows that nearly 90% of youth in foster care have experienced at least one traumatic event, and nearly half have reported exposure to 4 or more different types of trauma. Traumatic events can include child abuse and neglect. It can also include exposure to domestic violence, community violence, or experiencing the violent death of a loved one, among others. Repeat traumatic exposure, particularly those inflicted by a parent or caregiver, like abuse and neglect, can have long-term impacts on development and the ability to think, learn, and concentrate. So this is due in part to the stress response cycle, which you may have heard referred to as fight, flight, or freeze mode, or the body's alarm system, which is designed to protect you from danger. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that fight, flight, and freeze mode looks like. So say you're out on a walk and you come across a snake, and that snake is very clearly aware of your presence. So if you are anything like me, your heart is going to start beating faster, your blood pressure will rise, you might start breathing heavily. Stress hormones like cortisol are likely pushing throughout your body, and your response may be to fight the snake, maybe run away as fast as you can, which is my plan, or just stand and stare, sort of unable to move, frozen in the moment. Now imagine you are out walking along the same path the next day, and you see a stick the same color of the snake you saw the day prior. Again, if you were anything like me, your mind is immediately going to think snake, and once again activate the fight, flight, or freeze response. Experiencing repeat or chronic trauma can leave the fight, flight, or freeze mode stuck in the on position, which means that youth become preoccupied, searching for danger or threats. When thinking about the transition to college, for many youth who've experienced foster care, it can be like seeing a stick and thinking that there's a snake. There are many aspects of a youth's life that changes during this transition. Everything from where they eat, sleep, and study to their access to trusted friends and adults. It is important to know that a hallmark of trauma is perceived lack of control and authority over one's life. This is particularly true for youth in foster care who have had decisions made for them by social workers, judges, and other authorities. Transitioning from high school to college is likely marked by a multitude of changes where they may feel helpless, such as not having control over where they live and who they live with. This can be very triggering for young people and reminiscent of past traumatic experiences, which, you guessed it, can probably activate their body's alarm system, and they will enter that fight, flight, freeze mode. So a youth who is triggered by this transition, so to speak, may not be as responsive to meeting deadlines or completing tasks. They may also have difficulty concentrating or staying organized. There are some obvious signals as well, such as appearing withdrawn or argumentative. You may also notice an increase in sort of quote unquote unhealthy behaviors as the youth tries to cope with the increased stress. So what can adult supporters like you do? First and foremost, check in often and regularly. And don't shy away from asking specific questions about stress level or concerns. I have some sample prompts here on the screen. One thing that I've noticed is that the first day of school, there's a lot of excitement. So when we call on the first day of school and we say, how did it go? We're met with, oh my gosh, it's amazing. There's 4 Starbucks on campus. Everything is so neat. And I'm so excited by this opportunity. But then by Friday of the same week, they're starting to realize how much work it's going to be, how soon their first assignments are due. So don't just call and check in on the first day, but call the week of and make sure that they're still feeling like they can manage the stress. Another thing you can do is connect students to campus support programs prior to the start of school, and really encourage them to meet over Zoom, since in-person meetings are just really not happening at this point. This will be important so they can put a name, a face to a name. They can start building those relationships and get comfortable reaching out to those campus supports as things perhaps get a little bit more challenging. Another thing that I highly recommend is connecting the students to other students or peers that are on campus. These could be peers that have foster youth experience and might be part of the EOPS or Guardian Scholars type programs, or they could also be on-campus peer mentors who maybe didn't have foster youth experience. Regardless, though, these types of connections can really help the student relate to another young person who's gone through this and learn skills and strategies that might help them. Lastly, if you are working at a college, you may want to make sure that students are aware of the mental health resources available to them, and then do warm handoffs. So it's not enough to say, yes, we have a mental health program on campus or a college counseling center. Really help do the warm handoff, make sure that they know who they're going to meet with, make sure that they have someone that they can specifically call or reach out to, because all of that is going to help increase the likelihood that they're going to access and utilize that support and service. Another major role you can play is helping youth meet their basic needs. I think that this sometimes goes without saying, but lack of basic needs really exacerbates a student's stress and anxiety levels. So one of the things that adult supporters can do is make sure that the youth has food access. This is going to be particularly important as campuses may be doing completely virtual classes in the fall, and so making sure that they feel food secure if they're not accessing food on campus. We have a handout that you can see from your control panel that is for adult supporters and really walks through how to apply and access CalFresh. So I highly recommend that you take a look at that. The other thing to be aware of is wellness-focused resources. And so prior to COVID, we might say making sure that they have access to a gym membership or things that they can utilize that will help with coping. So we're looking for folks to get a little bit creative and think about what other sort of wellness-focused resources they can encourage youth to engage in with campuses having limited sort of gyms available. The other thing is to make sure that youth are maximizing financial aid. So we want to make sure that they're getting all of the financial aid to cover as many basic needs as they can. This can be done by communicating with one of the financial aid officers and sort of looking at the financial aid package for the student and seeing if there's other areas where it could be increased or if they have other needs that will help them draw down additional funding and increase their quote unquote their unmet need. And then the other thing I want to mention is just making sure that youth are comfortable with the technology. This is really important to feel confident and prepared for the first day of school. There's a whole likely host of new software and programs and portals that the youth are going to be utilizing. So making sure all of that is functioning, that they have a working computer, that they know how to access, log in to all of those resources and each functionality, so to speak. So that can really help reduce that anxiety and stress at the start of school. And then the last thing that I want to mention is we want to allow for as much predictability as possible. This is really important to a young person's psychological safety when they've experienced trauma. So one of the greatest challenges with COVID is that things are constantly changing. There's no predictability. There's been a lot of back and forth about whether or not campuses are going to be open, if classes are going to be on campus, or if they're going to be virtual, if someone's going to be able to live on campus, or if they're not going to be able to live on campus. So all of this back and forth can really be anxiety inducing for young people who've experienced trauma and maybe have not always sensed that they have control over their own lives. And so one of the things that I want to recommend is just to allow for as much predictability as possible. And so that could be making decisions sooner, instead of waiting till the last minute, whether or not campuses are going to be closed and dorms are going to be open. So just trying to build in enough time so that youth has predictability and knows what's going to happen and start to mentally prepare for that. So I'm going to now turn it over to Karina. She's going to talk about matriculation. Karina.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Karina, and in this section of the presentation, I will be reviewing the necessary steps to ensure matriculation for a four-year and two-year schools. Next slide. I will start by reviewing the matriculation requirements for community college and four-year universities. I will then review the financial aid and Chafee Grant next steps and end with an overview of foster youth support programs on college campuses. Thank you, Sarah. In this slide, I have highlighted the enrollment requirements for community college. If students have not yet applied, it is important that they do so as soon as possible and register for a student portal. Admissions next steps that pertain to their specific community college will be outlined in their student portal. It is important to confirm math and English placements with their schools and secure an off-campus housing plan. We will be discussing housing a bit further in the presentation. Students will also need to meet with their counselor to develop their educational plan and register for classes. This is also very important for folks who are on the transfer route. Students will also need to pay any additional fees not covered by their financial fee waivers. Similarly, students attending a four-year university need to register for a student portal if they haven't done so already. Their admissions next steps that pertain to their college are also outlined on their portal. I would also like to highlight that in their student portals, they will also be getting different alerts for different documents, materials, or pieces of information that are still required by the admissions or financial aid team. So it's really important to consistently check your student portals and your student emails. It is also recommended that students meet with a counselor at the very beginning of their semester or fall quarter to develop an educational plan as well. Students will need to register for classes and pay any additional fees not covered by their financial aid. Most schools are hosting virtual summer bridge programs and orientation programs. Due to the current state, most of these programs are starting towards the end of July, beginning of August. So it's really important to check on your school's specific deadlines to see if they are accepting students for a summer bridge programs, but all students should be able to access a virtual orientation. Colleges have extended their deadline for high school transcript submission. This is a really important step in the admissions process. Please check with your admissions office for the exact deadline of when official high school transcripts need to be submitted. In the next slide, I will talk about financial aid and review some of the important next steps. My first announcement is to ensure that folks on this webinar are aware that new policy has extended the deadline for foster youth to September 2nd. If students haven't submitted their FAFSA or California DREAM Act, please ensure students complete that as soon as possible to prevent any delays in the process. In the next slide, we will review Chafee Grant eligibility and next steps for that specifically. But to focus back on the next steps for FAFSA, once students submit their FAFSA or DREAM Act, students will need to create a web grants portal via the California Student Aid Commission's website. It is also linked here. So, in the web grants account, students will need to make sure that they confirm their college of attendance and ensure that their high school GPA is uploaded to the Cal Grant. Students will also need to accept the Cal Grant and their Chafee funding on their portal. And new information just came out about the IRS verification of non-filing that I'd like to highlight. Some students are being flagged to submit an IRS verification form. For foster youth, homeless students, and other low-income students, the requirement to submit a verification of non-filing from the IRS in order to access financial aid is posing significant challenges in light of shutdowns at the IRS. On July 9th, the U.S. Department of Education released guidance reminding colleges and universities of the existing flexibility for verification of non-filing from the IRS, which allows campuses to accept a signed statement along with any W-2s as a result of the crisis. Copies of pay stubs, direct deposit records, or any employment offer letter are now acceptable in lieu of the W-2 forms. Please note, as well, there are specific guidelines issued for foster youth that allows for the acceptance of a signed statement without requiring submission of W-2s. The guidance states, in the case of foster care youth, given the unlikelihood that such students would have earned enough to require them to file taxes, we will permit the institution to accept a signed statement from the foster care youth that he or she earned less than the amount that triggers the requirement for taxpayers to file tax returns. My biggest piece of advice with financial aid is to always consult with the direct financial aid advisor at your pertaining institution. Because of COVID and safer at home orders, students are experiencing some delays in connecting with their financial aid and admissions office. However, if we stay persistent, we should be receiving that information or make sure that we are calling financial aid and admissions offices to be up to date with their most updated information with regards to deadlines and any other materials or documents that foster youth will need to submit. I'd like to go to the next slide on Chafee Grant eligibility. Foster youth who meet the outlined eligibility requirements are eligible for the Chafee Grant and are still able to apply. Eligibility requirements are the following. Students must be under the age of 26, enrolled in at least 6 units in foster care between ages of 16 to 18. Similarly to the FAFSA, students will need to log in to their web grants portal. Some students have been flagged for submitting a foster care verification form. If students are not verified through their automatic match, it's important that students download this PDF form, get the necessary signatures, and resubmit to the web grants portal. It's also important for students and any adult supporters to consistently check emails from the California Student Aid Commission or the College Financial Aid Office on disbursement next steps. And more information and resources can be found on their website as well, which is listed on our PowerPoint slide. And lastly, as Sarah mentioned earlier, it's very important that our foster youth get connected to campus supports, especially with regards to resources and other areas of financial aid that these programs can support our foster youth with. The California College Pathways website includes a searchable database for foster youth contacts at California colleges and universities. These support programs include EOPS and EOP, disabled student services, tutoring, basic needs centers, counseling and psychological services, as well as our Guardian Scholar Next Up programs. So that database is reachable using the link listed on the PowerPoint slide. And that concludes my overview of the matriculation process and necessary steps. I will now turn it over to Francisco for housing.
Thank you so much, Karina. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Thank you so much for joining us again. My name is Francisco Zamudio. Again, I'm a program manager within the education department at United Friends of the Children. Very excited to speak with you all about this topic and specifically how we can support our youth with regards to housing, and discussions that we can have with our students, just kind of generally in allowing them to lead the way. If we can go to the next slide. All right, so let's talk about housing and summer melt. So as I mentioned, I'm currently a program manager with United Friends of the Children, but prior to coming to UFC about 3 years ago, I had worked for 8 years in residential life at various campuses across the state. So UC San Diego, UC Santa Barbara, and USC. And then I ended up moving to New Jersey and was an associate director for new student orientation and family programs at Rutgers University, where I served there for 5 years. So this idea of being very familiar with housing and also the transitional issues that youth have as they make their way onto a college campus is something that matters greatly to me, and I'm going to try my best to share some advice to help with housing and summer melt. And yeah, so if we'll go to the next slide. So just to kind of give you a preface of what I hope to be discussing here with everybody is, again, even in the best of times, housing instability is a significant contributing factor to summer melt. Whether it's the overwhelming nature of applying for on-campus housing, again, as Sarah kind of mentioned earlier, students feeling anxiety and stress about not knowing who they're going to live with, not being able to choose where they're going to live. All these types of factors, the cost of housing, whether or not housing is going to be conducive to academic success, all these things are typically contributing factors, and they're amplified even more now during COVID-19. So knowing that, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we know what are the current housing plans for campuses and call it across the state with regards to COVID-19. We also want to explore what resources are available to housing, what resources, are available to homeless and housing insecure youth. And lastly, we'll want to explore how we allow students to lead the way as we support them with the technique that at United Friends of the Children we utilize called motivational interviewing. So if we can go to the next slide. All right, great. So what do we know about campus housing during the time of COVID-19? So this is what we know currently. The Cal States and the UCs are planning to provide on-campus housing for the next academic year. However, it's going to be at reduced density. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we're going to see basically the elimination of triples across campuses. So students will only be placed in doubles or in singles, and there's going to be a varying degree of capacity. So some schools are at 75%. Chico State, if you look at their website, have announced that they will only be providing 46% of the capacity that they would normally be providing at a given year. The good thing, though, is that these campuses are legally required to give priority to foster youth. So that's a good thing to note there. I did note that with the elimination of triples, that means that the only options are doubles and singles. If a student is, what we're seeing at many campuses is them noting that if a student is placed in a single, they will still only have to pay the double rate. That essentially there will be no single rate. Again, that varies from campus to campus, so it'll be important for students and for the adults that are supporting them to clarify the specific pricing policy for each campus with regards to their singles. So yes, the other thing that we know is that most colleges are still currently accepting cancellations of housing offers from students. So if a student is no longer feeling up to living on campus, they still have the ability on most campuses to cancel without penalty. The other thing that we know is that campuses are going to remain fluid in their housing plans. Some campuses are further along in terms of explaining their plans to the public, Others are still holding off until the end of the month, maybe even beginning of August, because they're really waiting to respond to the state of the pandemic. As Dr. Fauci has mentioned many times, we don't create the timeline, the virus does, and I think that is a good thing to remember, and clearly something that our colleges and universities are using as they develop their plans. Next. All right. So most housing application deadlines have passed. So hopefully your scholars who are attending a four-year university have already applied for housing. If they have not, strongly encourage them to try to get on a wait list, especially if they are interested. And for the youth that have applied, they should be receiving or have received information from their schools through their student portal or through the email that the university has on file with them. One thing that I do want to note here is that there is still an initial deposit fee that is included for most housing at a four-year campus. So if that is a challenge for your student, it's important to talk to the housing staff to see if that fee can be waived, given the foster care status of the young person that you're working with. And if for whatever reason it cannot be waived, that's when conversations should start taking place with things with ILP coordinators, AB 12 social workers, to see if they could potentially participate in helping to pay for that initial housing deposit. All right, next. All right, thank you so much. So what can we as adult supporters do? So even in the best of times, waiting for housing information, for contract paperwork can be a tedious and slow process. And so preaching persistence and patience with our students is going to be critically important. Housing offices are often understaffed and kind of swamped at this point, even in the best of times, as I've mentioned. So this is going to be a particularly difficult challenge for them to be responding to students and their supportive adults. So again, just kind of be patient and persistent as you approach this process. The other thing that I'll say is accessing a youth student portal with them is critically important. Sarah and everybody you've heard so far has made mention to the student portal, and it's daunting for an 18, 19-year-old, right? In some cases, 17-year-old, to look at all this information, decipher it, and try to understand what's what. So having an adult there that is willing to log in with them, to go through the information that's within the student portal and try to make sense of it is extremely helpful and something that I would highly recommend to any supportive adult who's working with a young person. Campus foster youth support programs are also excellent resources. Again, you've heard you heard Karina mentioning making sure that youth are already trying to connect with them this summer. Many foster youth support services are also housed under EOP, and so being able to also have students apply for these programs if they have to this summer, so that they're ready to go once they virtually hit campus, I guess, this year, will be very important. Let me see what else here. And then, yes, the last thing is, I mentioned earlier that legally our campuses are required to give priority housing access to foster youth. But how each campus identifies their foster youth can be a little bit different. So are they doing that through the FAFSA submission? Are they doing that through who has already pre-enrolled in programs like EOP or a foster care support system and identify themselves as foster youth? So being able to contact a university's housing department and asking them that clarifying question will be very helpful. One of the handouts that you'll note are available through the webinar is a list of COVID-specific website links for all 23 CSUs and 9 of the UCs. And basically, you'll see within that handout again a link to their COVID-19 information page. And if there was anything specific about housing that I was able to find, I added an additional link. And within that document, you'll also find a specific link to each campus's housing department so that you can more easily find contact information, including phone numbers and emails for folks. So that's another resource that is available to you again within the handout section. If we go to the next slide here. So we've talked a little bit again about our four-year campus and universities, our bachelor degree granting institutions and their housing plans and how we could support our students that are attending those. But we know that foster youth are more than likely who are enrolled on a college campus this year are going to be attending one of our California community college campuses. So I wanted to basically provide some context first before we get into how we might support them about the experiences that are that they face. So this is based off of a survey from March 2019 done through the California community colleges. It was the Real College survey. And as I mentioned, it has a lot of great information if you want to look it up. Again, it's the California Community Colleges Real College Survey. Has a lot of stuff about food insecurity as well and basic needs. But with regards to housing, and this is before COVID-19 again, 20% of our community college students experienced homelessness within the previous year. 43% who had been in foster care experienced homelessness. You see that 60% of our California community college students were housing insecure. And then there is a typo there. It should be 11% of the California community college students experience homelessness just generally. I believe that's correct. I believe that's a typo there. So with that kind of context, I want to go into what are the possible housing resources for our community college going students. Thank you so much for the next slide there. And so I want to start off by talking about THP Plus. So that's the Transitional Housing Program Plus. So THP Plus provides 24 to 36 months of supportive housing for former foster and probation age youth ages 18 to 24, so before their 25th birthday. To be eligible for THP Plus, a youth must have exited from foster care on or after their 18th birthday, and that includes out-of-home probation youth. Youth who are accepted into THP Plus must agree to enter into a transitional independent living program, so a TILP. And that basically is it's not a transitional independent living plan, not program. And that plan is something that is assessed every single year to try to make sure that students are getting the services and support and the skill building that they need. So again, that THP Plus, if a student meets the eligibility requirements, is an excellent resource for community college going students who are homeless or insecure. AB 12, so again, another small typo, I'm sorry, I mentioned SILP there, but what I was really looking for is talking about folks that are in extended foster care, being able to work with their social worker to additionally find more permanent and stable housing for them is important. So again, if a student is in extended foster care, being able to work with their social worker is a good resource when the student is facing homelessness or housing insecurity. Thirdly, we'll talk about local coordinated entry systems. So here in Los Angeles County, we have the coordinated entry system, which basically serves to try to create a streamlined process that prioritizes youth who are facing homelessness. Now, Housing and Urban Development mandates that every community that receives state and federal funds for homelessness use a coordinated entry system. So wherever you are throughout the state of California, you have a coordinated entry system, a CES, and it's as simple as, and I wish I could have just created a document, but it was a little bit too time consuming to do it, but an easy Google search of your county's name and coordinated entry system will bring you to the website and provide you with valuable information on how to refer a young person to the system, what the intake process looks like, what next steps are. And one of the things that I'll talk about with the local coordinated entry system very briefly is our students are very proud. They're super resilient. And oftentimes what I've seen, at least from us here in LA County, is that when they go ahead and they talk to their intake person, they often underplay the seriousness of their situation. So really coaching our students to be honest and vulnerable about their situation will help them be prioritized as they go through this process. Again, campus support programs are, as I kind of move on here, important to be connected with when a student is facing homelessness or housing insecurity. Local shelters, again, are another excellent resource. And then legal services are also important. Many of our youth who are living and renting currently may be facing eviction, and many of them often don't know their rights with regards to that eviction. So being able to even search on campus to see if there's a student legal services office, or knowing if there are renters pro bono legal programs in your community are a great connection to be able to provide to your students so that they can go ahead and fight unjustified evictions, or anything that's kind of undermining their rights as a tenant. We'll go to the next slide here. And so this is where I kind of want to wrap up, and it's focusing on motivational interviewing. So motivational interviewing is a technique used by United Friends of the Children when we work with our youth. It's a counseling strategy that's really focused on listening and affirming the feelings, goals, and priorities of our clients, as opposed to a more traditional counseling approach, which is more about directing our clients to change. Again, if you look at the handout section, I went ahead and provided, because this is kind of it's a pretty hefty thing to cover in just a few minutes, and I wouldn't be able to do it adequately. So that motivational interviewing PDF there is going to be something that will be super helpful. But one of the key components of motivational interviewing is accepting and focusing on resolving a client's ambivalence towards something that they've stated as a goal, or they kind of know that they need to work on. So that's a big departure for many of us that are working as supportive adults, working with the youth. And I want to give a quick example here. So imagine, especially right now, a scholar choosing to stay home and maybe forego the beginning of their community college experience, because right now they are working and they're actually getting a ton of hours because they're working fast food, and maybe there's another adult in the home who's had their hours reduced. So they just feel like maybe it's better for me to just go ahead and make all this extra money right now while I can and really support the household. Under a motivational interviewing approach, we would go ahead and listen and affirm what the student is telling us, and we wouldn't try to challenge them, but what we would try to do is identify the fact that maybe in the past they've shared that it's a really important goal for them to get their college degree, right? And so we're not trying to play a gotcha game of like, oh, you're telling me that this is important, but in the past you've told me that this is really important to you, right? We're not trying to play that gotcha game. What we're trying to do is identify the discrepancies and then talk to them about how that this new priority that they have, how does it support that earlier goal of college completion that they've shared with us. Again, we find it to be a very successful method of counseling, and one that allows the student to really drive us, and we just have to make sure that as we're approaching this, that we're honoring the decisions of our students and understanding that we're not in the driver's seat, they're in the driver's seat, they're making their decisions, and we are really just playing the role of cheerleaders, supportive adults, people that are affirming and helping to provide them with the tools and the opportunities and the thought partnering towards working towards their goals. So I really highly encourage folks to check out that motivational interviewing PDF. And I believe that is it for me. And so right now we'll go ahead and we'll turn it over to Giselle.
Hi, thank you. So I'm a foster education liaison at the high school level. I work with youth from 9th grade to senior year and 6 months after graduation. So I do get to see them during summer and their first semester in college. So I do get to help out with the renewal of the FAFSA and seeing what first semester college looks like. So I like to go with you guys through some of the challenges of getting to first day of college, because during the summer we'll get a lot of the this is really hard, maybe this isn't for me, I changed my mind, and again, this is really hard, Miss Ramos, I don't know. And this year it's looked even harder, to be honest. So I want to show you guys and talk a little bit and share with you guys what it looks like and share scenarios, real life on the ground scenarios with what it looks like with our kiddos and our youth. Next slide. One of the things right off the bat as they're leaving the high school is we want to look at that our kiddos have clear transcripts. So our kids, from the multiple placement that they have, their transcripts are not clear. So I can tell you that I'll sit and they'll have 4 times English 9, and they'll have it that they took it once or they took it twice. So literally before they leave the campus, I'm looking to make sure that their transcript is clear, meaning that if they had credit retrieval, that their credits are there. So they're showing a clear transcript. That if they were on AB 167 or AB 216, that is not on their transcript. That should not be on their transcript. There is no such thing as an AB 216 diploma. It is just a graduation. So I do make sure when they come off our campus and they're sending that transcript to a community college or a 4-year university or a vocational or just for their records, we're making sure that transcript is clear, and that is a barrier. I'm making sure that our kiddos don't have holds, fees due to book returns or they're lost. Usually this is really easy because we walk up to the accounting office and it's cleared. Right now this year, it looked like we had to email 7 people. Our students don't know what it means to CC, and we have to go through the directories and find out who is who in each department. So there was a lot of frustration with COVID of, what do you mean I have to email and CC and CC? What does CC mean, Ms. Ramos? To make sure that there was no holds or backup so that we can go ahead and move transcripts and send clear transcripts to community colleges or 4-year universities. Then there was requesting of a transcript. Last year, we taught our kiddos jump on Naviance, request a transcript, and they were sent out. This year, the kiddos went in, they requested a transcript through Naviance, but because of COVID, there has been a lot of holds up. So yesterday, I must have got about 9 calls. Ms. Ramos, CSUN's deadline was July 15. They're saying they don't have my transcript. So what we saw yesterday was that admission counselors were saying, can you send me the photo, the screenshots of saying that you sent it out? So that's what we were doing yesterday, screenshots of, look, it was sent out. It's just pending in a queue, but it's been sent out to the universities. So our kiddos are facing those challenges right now, that transcripts are sitting in queues right now and they have been sent out. So, and then the school staffs are not there. So our kiddos don't know who to reach out to. So please come back, let them know that the person on campus is the registrar. That is the person in charge. That's another thing, teaching our kids who are on campus. That's like my day-to-day work. It's the registrar. We need to get a hold of the registrar on campus. The next thing is teaching our kids how to pick up their diploma. Last year, you graduated on stage, you picked up your diploma after graduation. It was clean cut. This year, diploma pickup was changed. The scenario that I wanted to share with you was our kids were all virtual this year, but there were still placement changes. So I had a student in the Palmdale area, if anybody's familiar with that. And 3 weeks before graduation or last day of school, the student was placed in Torrance. It is over a 58 miles difference. The school's regular procedure on diploma pickup is the student is the only person allowed to pick up your high school diploma from the registrar. The student is to go to Saddleback. They needed to forward a diploma. There was a huge in between with the diploma. So there was a lot of working out and talking to administrative that we needed to be a lot of flexible. So there is flexibility with the COVID-19, as supporters, we do need to talk. What we ended up doing was, I know on campus, admin knows that I work with her on campus. So they said, okay, well, you come and pick up the diploma. I know the social worker. I just met the social worker. She picked up diploma. The kiddo who is in Torrance got the diploma and sent it to where she needed to send it to. So diploma pickup this year was very different than on a normal year. Another thing on the getting to the first day of college is communication and contact. Life scenario, as we're working on FAFSA and we're working on Chafee and we're doing college applications, we teach our kiddos are like, oh, let me use my school website or my school email, excuse me. And you teach them the school email will be deactivated in a year to 2 year, depending on the school. So they're like, oh, my Gmail, no, that's not, my email is staring at the stars every night. I can't use that. So this is a good point to start as supporters, teaching them to make an email that, is professional or appropriate and to remember the password and to remember it. So we work on that, and that's the one we're going to use for college and the portals. I work with them on guardian scholars or whatever foster group there is on campus or the resource, depending where they're going. I do have foster youth, one in particular that does not want to be identified as foster. So it is reaching out about other groups, and she's very adamant that she just doesn't want to identify as foster. So that linkage is very hard for me, respecting her voice and choice of she doesn't want to identify, but I know she needs other resources. So it's exploring the other resources that are on campus. Going through class schedules, that course selection book, before you sit down with the student and you go in the summer and you go through that book one-on-one. Right now, doing it online, it's been harder. They lose focus a lot sooner, and they're distracted because they pick up the phone, and you don't see them pick up the phone because we're on a computer. But I am going through class schedules right now and reminding them, okay, remember, what are the points of interest? Let's look at class selections appropriate to what you want to be like. So what would be some of the class that would keep your interest, and some of those classes that that would be harder, because that first year is very overwhelming because they do have things, this student in particular right now, her thoughts is, what's going to happen to me? I'm going to turn 18. Am I staying here? And I'm not staying here, and I still have to take a hard class. Those are the conversations that are really happening during the summer with the kiddos and trying to keep them in college. School material options. So we are looking at, what is available for them for school. I was just informed, literally, the community college is doing laptop pickups for this online, the online way we're going back to school. And that's literally right now working with our kids for this year or returning to school, telling them, hey, get on that website, find out what's available to see what's going on. That's new to the work with our foster youth. And that's new to me in my role, because that's not what I did last year. Seeing that we got to find out that technology as internet being accessible 100% because they can be dropped out of Zoom classes and they can be dropped out of Google and Canvas and Chalkboard and all the platforms. So that's been new to the work and added to the frustration. Next slide. I think it went backwards, Sarah. The other thing that we did live was learning how to actively navigate the campus portals. The campus portals gives them what money's available, what money came out. So that I've been doing virtually with students right now. This is where you see your financial aid. This is the money that's available, teaching them what e-deposit is. So this is where you're going to put with direct deposit where your money comes back. So my kiddo was like, one kiddo in particular, so I have to open a bank account. Bank accounts right now, that's it, so that your money from your financial aid that's left over or your Chafee, when it comes back, this is where you could get it faster, and you can see it on your portal. You see your classes on your portal. You see any notifications are on your portal. All that, you can see it there. But we got it, now we're doing this via Zoom, via Google, as before it was more interactive. So being patient as a supporter right now is really important. Exploring tutoring options. So I got to see them in high school. So I got to know if English and math is hard. So as mentioned by Karina, you previous, those assessments, already knowing what options in tutoring before the first day of college is very important, and letting them know that, and we're already building them that you already had a hard time in math. Remember, we were already in tutoring. So we might need to look at this already so we know what's available. Right now with COVID-19, we are exploring the campus website weekly because of COVID, everything is changing on a week-to-week basis. Week-to-week basis, we are looking with my community college students as well as my returning students from last year in college. Every week we are looking at that campus website. College holds, yesterday I got to work with CSUN, and they just extended the holds that they can't not be jeopardized to lose their spaces in classes because there is a delay. But yesterday was a stressful day and things are happening day to day. And again, we're looking at schedule reviews with labs and requirements. I was looking at that with my four-year students, and I was looking at that with my community college students, like looking at their schedules, seeing what it looks like, because our youth are thinking about jobs because they don't know if their placement is going to stay. Placement's always one thing that all the students that I work with have in common is they are talking about housing. And I love that Francisco touched on it because that's one thing they all have in common is their housing. What happens if it doesn't work out? So we're constantly looking at scheduling and reviewing that. What does a part-time job or a job look with college? So that is something that I'm constantly talking to my kiddos about right now. This year it looked really different. We can't do campus tours. We're doing virtual tours of what does Zoom look like? What does Google, what does Canvas looks like? That's what it's looking like this year. Next slide. I want to get them to the first day. And so for me, I always call the night before. I hype them up. Tomorrow's your first day of college. I remember that going to kindergarten. And for me, that's a big day. I do call the first day. How did it go? And somebody mentioned previously, the first day is the easy day. It's after. I check on how it went, and that's how I get the first day done. But it is important to continue checking in at least every week, and that's why it's my role is so crucial because I get to check in for the next 6 months for college. And each kiddo has their own story in this, and the scenario looks very, very different. And it is very important to meet them where they're at. For me, some kiddos do great email, some do great text messages, some will screenshot. This is the message that came in, Ms. Ramos. Meeting them where they're at, especially right now with COVID, I think is the key. So I do get tons of screenshots from one particular kiddo who will not do Zoom and she will not do Google Hangouts. So that's literally what my scenarios look like with my kiddos. I just wanted to give you guys a little heads up what it looks like getting them their first day to college. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Asia, who is going to share her experience as a former foster youth who is attending college.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to go ahead and discuss how many youth want to be successful on the first day of college. Everyone. So I created some steps based off of my experience. Okay, so the first one is secured housing. So ideally, housing will be determined and secured prior to the start of school. It was helpful to know where I was going to live while I was a senior in high school. And 2, determine transportation. How far is their housing from campus? I think it's important that a student does a test run or check the bus stops and schedules so they know their whereabouts and where they can find their resources off and on campus. This is something that adult supporters can do to help students. 3, create adaptable plans. What happens if the housing arrangement doesn't work out? So we need a backup plan for the student because not everything works out with housing. We want to prevent the crisis mode, and we want to make sure the students are okay. What is my school schedule, work schedule, and are they aligning? So that's important as well. A lot of students don't know that they can adjust their schedule for their first month of school, and that's going to prevent dropout rates. 4, attend summer bridge. Even though summer bridge is going on right now, it's good that if they are in summer bridge at the moment, that they build relationships and learn the locations of the buildings and find resources. And that taught me how to be a good college student along the way. And then 5, secure flexible employment. So when I found employment, I made sure that it was flexible with my class schedule and that it didn't interfere with my school. The job I started over the summer, it was easy for me to, be flexible with my school schedule in the fall. So I didn't have to adjust my schedule at all. But I wish I applied on campus position first so I didn't have to worry about transportation because that's one of the main barriers that I had. One helpful hint is to encourage students to spend the summer collecting letters of recommendations from their high school teachers because even on-campus jobs can require them. And 6, create a budget. I wasn't really good at budgeting when I first got my financial aid and all the scholarships. I think it's important that the student knows how to spend money and not spend it on things like, Starbucks every day because it helps you wake up early, or spend it on too much on like Uber and Lyft so you can get around. So budgeting can help a student use that and save it for important stuff that can happen in a crisis later on, and also help them be secure during the winter and summer semesters when they're not attending, or if they are attending, that they have that money to help them during those times that they're not in school. And 7, create a plan for wellness. So as a student, I thought it was more convenient to eat out because I wasn't able to be at home all the time and cook meals, and I had to learn how to meal prep. So eating out is not healthy, and no longer having healthy meals or food prepared for them. It's a lot. Overeating to cope with anxiety and stress, and may need to be connected to a mental health counselor if a student is gaining a lot of weight or just not getting enough exercise. And that's all I have for you. I'm gonna go ahead and turn this over to Sarah.
Thank you, Asia. It's so nice to hear from someone who has lived experience in the foster care system and then making that college transition. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your tips with us. So next, we're going to spend, I think, our final 10 minutes here on the webinar answering questions. And so as a reminder, you have a questions panel on your panel on the right-hand side. So go ahead and type in your questions if you haven't already. And I know that Debbie's going to jump in and help us assign questions and read them aloud so everyone knows who the question came from. So Debbie, I will turn it over to you. I believe we have a couple pending questions, and then if you haven't, like I mentioned, submitted your question already, please do so now.
Hi, excuse me. Yes, thank you everyone. And thank you for being here, and thank you to all the wonderful panelists. So I'm going to walk through the questions that have been submitted. The first few are actually financial aid related questions. And so I'm going to go ahead, they're a little bit technical, so I'm going to go ahead and just take a shot at answering these myself. One question is about if a foster youth wants to get financial aid for the summer, meaning this current summer that we're in right now to take classes, and what FAFSA do they submit? So the question is that they've already submitted a FAFSA for the upcoming school year that starts in the fall, and does that cover the summer session? So the answer to that question is no, it does not cover the summer session. In order to get financial aid for the current summer, they need to submit a FAFSA for the 1920 school year. And if you go on the FAFSA website, you'll see that when you start a new FAFSA, it gives you the option whether you want to do a 1920 FAFSA or a 2021 FAFSA. And so if you want to get financial aid for this summer, you got to also do the 1920 FAFSA, even if the student has already done the FAFSA for the upcoming year. The next question has to do about the extended deadline for the Cal Grant. So it was mentioned that foster youth have until September 2nd to qualify for an entitlement Cal Grant award at community colleges. So the question is whether that's just for this year. The answer is no, it's not just for this year, it's actually permanent. So there was a bill passed in 2018 that permanently extends the deadline just for foster youth to be able to qualify for a Cal Grant award. It's just for foster youth at community colleges. But any foster youth is going to a community college, as long as they submit their FAFSA and have their GPA uploaded by their high school by September 2nd, they will qualify for a Cal Grant if they meet all the other criteria. So they're not bound by that March 2nd deadline, although a student who is going to a CSU or a UC or another private four-year institution does need to make sure they get their FAFSA in by March 2nd in order to qualify for a Cal Grant. And then the next financial aid question is about the dreaded verification of non-filing. So this is this form that some students are required to submit verifying from the IRS that they didn't file taxes. And just to clarify, there is this new guidance that says that because of everything going on, a student can submit a letter, kind of an affidavit, testifying to the fact that they don't have to submit, that they don't have to file taxes rather than having to get this proof from the IRS. The question is whether there's a template available that can be used by students to submit this verification. That is a really excellent question. The answer is I don't know, but there should be one. And so I'm going to look into this, and we're going to include some information in the follow-up email that goes out after the webinar. So thank you for that question. Okay, my next question is for Francisco. The question is, do you know if homeless youth are also prioritized for on-campus housing in addition to foster youth?
So the answer to that is yes. Assembly Bill 1228 is the same bill that gave priority to foster youth, also included homeless youth in there. So the CSUs and the UCs are legally asked to prioritize homeless youth.
Great, thank you. Another question for you, Francisco. Somebody's asking if there's a list of open emergency shelters for foster youth or some other way to find out about emergency shelters. A lot of the shelters are at capacity these days.
Yep. So yes, that has been our experience as well. And if one of them does exist, I am not aware of it and would love to be made aware of it because it is a changing target every single day. Within hours, a place will have a vacancy and then you call back and it's been filled. So it's definitely very challenging. My best recommendation would be to contact 211 and that way you get a better sense of what might be available in your area for you to reach out to, especially given maybe special demographic categorizations that a student might fall into that they might be able to connect you with. So 211 would be the best resource as far as I'm aware.
Great, thank you very much. So this next question, I'm gonna put out to all of you and see if any of you have an answer. The question is, do you have any strategies for assisting a youth with the challenges around attending virtual classes? So maybe I'm wondering, Giselle, how you have kind of gone about that, preparing students for that.
We've had a lot of challenges with that. Some of the challenges have been that because there's been lots of platforms and they've had to learn multiple platforms. So YouTube has been my friend. Google Research has been my friend. And I've literally walked through that. Emailing teachers directly and finding out office hours and asking for direct contact for the youth and not an email, and actually throwing out an email to teachers and saying, not everybody can read and understand. Some people are audio. Can you explain it to them? Has been very helpful. I've seen success with that. It just doesn't work putting it out in writing. That's left for perception and interpretation. So that's been helpful for me. And I've seen better outcomes during summer school than I did the last 3 months of school, with teachers actually reaching out and making a phone call instead of just sending an email.
Great. So the next question I'm going to put to Karina. The question is, are there specific programs at colleges that are just dedicated to assisting foster youth?
I believe you may be referring to our Guardian Scholars programs. All Cal States, UCs, and community colleges should have a foster youth support program, if not a person that is a direct connection to the campus resources. Going back to our slide with the California College Pathways, they have, I have listed a link there that has a directory of all of the campus supports people and their contact information to directly support foster youth and connecting them to campus support services. I hope that answers the question, or if you'd like more clarification. Okay.
That's great, thank you. So the next question is for Angenique. So somebody is writing that they're working with a foster youth who was accepted to Sac State, but is currently feeling discouraged about everything that's going on, including housing, FAFSA, not knowing anyone. Do you have any advice for how this social worker can motivate the foster youth, and what motivated you to make it to your first day of class? Angenique, I'm not sure if you maybe are muted.
Can you repeat that question for me?
Yeah, so the question is, somebody's working with a foster youth who's accepted to Sac State, but they're feeling really discouraged about whether to go. And so they're asking, what would your advice be if you were talking to this foster youth? How would you encourage them to stick with it and show up for that first day of class?
I just say look to the future because right now, like what's going on right now, like, you need to look to the future and do what you need to do to be a successful adult. It starts now. She has to like transition to an adult. So I know it's hard because it was hard for me too, but it's the first step of being an adult. Like she has to do that for herself.
All right, thank you. Another financial aid question I'll take real quick. Somebody wants to know if a student can receive financial aid for a private university. The answer is yes. They would need to fill out a FAFSA and a Chafee Grant application. The question is, does it cover all the expenses? Probably not necessarily going to cover all the expenses, but you never know depending on what institutional aid is available, but definitely worth completing the FAFSA and the Chafee Grant application. So here's just a comment I'll share. Somebody's suggesting that when she works with youth, what she recommends is that they treat their classes like a job and set specific times, like these are the hours I'm going to do homework, this is when I'm going to take breaks, so that there's a real concrete schedule that the youth has to be able to accomplish everything that they need to accomplish related to being in school. So I know we're just about at time. We do have a few more questions, but I think that's all we're going to have time for right now. So Sarah, do you want to close us out? Oh, sorry. One last thing I wanted to say. Somebody asked about whether colleges were offering laptops for foster youth. Some campuses are doing this, so you definitely want to check with the campus to see whether or not they're making laptops available. And sometimes foster youth programs in particular will have laptops available, so make sure you check with the campus. But there are also laptops available through a program through iFoster. And so for foster youth in particular who are transitioning into college, they do have laptops available. So we will include information about how to access the iFoster laptop program in the follow-up email. And then the last thing I'll just say for the individual that that reached out about the student who's feeling discouraged, and somebody from Sac State just actually sent a chat over saying, make sure you have that student contact the Guardian Scholars Program. And that's true at any campus. You know, that's so important. Connecting them to that Guardian Scholars Program can be just incredibly helpful to help them manage their anxiety as well as any practical considerations that may be coming up. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to close us out.
Yes, so thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and also a huge thank you to all of our co-presenters today for the amazing information. As a reminder, this recording as well as the handouts will be emailed out to you later this afternoon, so you can use those and reference them as you need. If you have any additional questions that you did not have the opportunity to ask, please feel free to send me an email, sarah@jbay.org, and I will make sure to point your question to the right person and ensure that you get a response. But again, thank you so much for joining us today. That is the end of our webinar. Have a wonderful rest of your day.